Hey, welcome back to the podcast. I'm your host, Vanda, founder of the Period Makeover Solution. For today's episode, I thought that we would do a deep dive into a HTMA test that I did for a 31-year-old client of mine that was experiencing some really painful, disrupting periods and was looking for answers to how she could help support her body in a natural way to correct this. She didn't want to go on birth control. She had been on birth control previously, had some negative side effects from that, just in general didn't desire to be on a medication that was not necessarily necessary, and wanted to just tackle things in a more holistic, natural way in general. So, we are going to talk specifically about the macro minerals, what the connections we see here on this test are telling us can be leading to which of her symptoms. And then also, we're going to take a look at the ratios and talk about how that informs what we do as next steps for this client. So, first of all, we're going to talk about sodium. Now, this person's sodium level is very depleted. This is something that I commonly see in my clients. And when we have low sodium, we see things like worse cramps as far as periods, PMS anxiety, fatigue that happens leading up to the period, blood sugar crashes, and also increased pain sensitivity. So even though, yes, the cramps are worse, but you also are more sensitive to them. So the intensity of how painful they feel is heightened. We're going to skip over now to potassium. Potassium here is also almost completely depleted. Her level is a 1. That's very, very low. That's almost to the point of being so low that it couldn't be detected on the test. When we have low potassium, we have poor ovarian signaling. So that means the communication between your ovaries and your brain, that communication cannot happen effectively. We have a shorter luteal phase, PMS mood swings. That goes hand in hand with the anxiety that's being caused by the low sodium. Bloating is typically a factor, and that doesn't just have to be around the time of the person's menstrual cycle and they're leading up to their period. That can be even just all month long bloating that they're dealing with. Carb cravings, and then poor uterine muscle relaxation. So when we can't get into that relaxed state, we are going to be dealing with more cramps and more intense crampings, which again goes right back hand in hand with exactly what also the low sodium level is telling us. Next, we're going to look at calcium. So when calcium is low, our nervous system is more sensitive. So this is that feeling of like being on edge or having reactions that are kind of poor or maybe out of proportion with what is actually happening in the situation. Like it's when you're making a bigger deal out of something than what it truly is. This also contributes to heightened anxiety during PMS, so during that lead up to your cycle. Last one we're going to look at is magnesium. When magnesium is low, which it is on this test, we are going to see more cramping because we have increased prostaglandins, which impact the cramps and how intense those cramps are. Our body is also not going to be able to detox as effectively as it needs to be. So that can lead to headaches and even some migraines. It leads us more towards an estrogen dominant state because we have to be able to effectively eliminate our estrogen. And then it can also cause some constipation during that luteal phase. It adds to the anxiety and the irritability that we're already experiencing because of other low mineral levels, and contributing to that poor stress tolerance, which I think those two things go hand in hand. So we're irritable and we can't handle and react well to stressful situations. So this person's macro minerals, which is what we just went over, the calcium, magnesium, sodium, and potassium, they were low across the board. And they weren't just low, like specifically the sodium and the potassium were very, very depleted. So once we look at that, we evaluate that and we say, okay, this connects the dots for these symptoms here. We also want to then take a look at the ratios, which is just a separate box on the HTMA test. So first up here, we've got the calcium magnesium ratio. This ratio on this person's test is very high, leading to muscle tension, severe cramps, headaches, and anxiety. We jump over then to the sodium potassium ratio, which we have a sodium potassium pump on every one of our cells. And that is what dictates what can come in and can go out of the cell. And with this person's test, they were actually in an okay range here. But this is one of the reasons why there's so much nuance to interpreting an HTMA test and what the results mean. It's great that this ratio is actually within balance, but we can't just look at that in isolation and say, okay, we're good there. We have to remember that when we look at the minerals on an individual level, that both that sodium and potassium level are so very depleted. And we just want to make sure that as we are working to replenish these two minerals, that we're working on them kind of at the same time so that we can try to keep this ratio as balanced as we can instead of attacking this from like oh my gosh, we've got to get the sodium replenished first. We're going to only focus on the sodium because then that would throw off this ratio, which would, further impact symptoms. Okay, next thing we want to look at here, we're going to talk about the zinc and copper ratio. This is also very high for this client, which has me questioning, what does their copper levels look like? Do we need to support the body's like iron recycling system a little bit so that we can use copper efficiently and detox a little bit of it if we need to? Someone that has a very high zinc copper ratio leans also more towards being estrogen dominant, having heavy bleeding, having those PMS symptoms. Now, you guys have heard me say many times that we don't evaluate what the estrogen progesterone levels are with an HTMA test, but that can kind of point us in that direction. We can then match that up with the person's symptoms and proceed accordingly, whether that is an intervention that we're going to do, maybe it's a supplement that we're going to work on, maybe it's just that we're supporting digestion and regular bowel movements first up, and then we'll talk about some hormone testing later on. But it gives us a clear direction of where we need to go. Last ratio that I want to touch on here is the calcium potassium ratio. This was like off the charts high for this person, which means that their thyroid is sluggish, and that's not evaluating, is the body able to produce thyroid hormone? We would assess that with blood work. What we're looking at here is, can the body get the thyroid hormone that it's producing into the cell where it actually needs to be to do its job? If this system is sluggish, then even if our body is making enough thyroid hormone, we are still going to have symptoms of low thyroid function because the system as a whole and our body getting that thyroid hormone into the cell, again, where it needs to be to do its job, that is the system that's not working efficiently. We also see when calcium potassium ratio is high, that again, this is another indicator that we are having trouble clearing estrogen from our body, and the person would be leaning more towards estrogen dominance. Also contributes to heavy bleeding, passing clots, and the PMS fatigue that we get leading up to our period. So with this information, we don't just get to check boxes and say like, okay, it makes sense that we're having this symptom. It makes sense that we're having this symptom. It makes sense that we're having this symptom. That is all great. I find that for my clients, that can be very validating sometimes because so many times they are like going to their provider and telling them they're having all these symptoms and they're being met with like, well, everything here looks normal on your blood work, so I don't know. We now validate with this test, with this HTMA test, that there is reasons why you're having the symptoms that you're having and why you're struggling so much. And now not only do we know why, but we know how to fix it because we have the clear direction of we need to support sodium, we need to support potassium, we need to support magnesium and calcium. And there's very clear directions I give my clients on how to do that with dietary changes, things we add into our diet, mineral drinks, specific brands based on the ratio of like sodium to potassium content. Do we have magnesium? Do we need to, what supplements do we need to look at? Because there are big gaps here. On this person's test, they were very, very depleted. So we're not going to be able to just use nutrition with this client. We are going to need to supplement in order to replenish these minerals within a timely manner. So I hope that this has been helpful to help you guys to see like what the connections are on a tangible level between mineral results and period related symptoms. If you are like, gosh, I really want to know what my mineral levels are. I want to know why I am having these symptoms. Then an HTMA test is going to be the answer for you. You can book a hormone clarity call with me in the show notes to get set up to do the HTMA test. That way we can just have a quick chat beforehand to say like, you're going to share with me. Here's what I've got going on. Here's the symptoms I'm having. This is how it's impacting me. What do you think my next steps should be? And we're just going to clarify together quickly that yes, the HTMA test is the next best step. And if it's not, then I'll give you that guidance too of like, no, actually, I think this would be your next best step. So the link to book one of those calls is always in the show notes. I hope that this has been helpful and interesting and informative. And I hope you guys have a great rest of your week. I will be back next week to talk with you. See you then.